In a glittering ballroom, Celeste Warren stands frozen, champagne dripping from her blouse, her dignity under siege. Gabrielle Vanderbilt, eyes sharp with malice, hurls the golden liquid and sneers, "Wipe the floor, maid!" The crowd's laughter stings as Evelyn Pierce and Bianca Harrington mock her as a flea market Chanel. Clutching a rag, Celeste's gaze burns with unyielding fire. Will she break or rise? This is a tale of courage against cruelty, where one woman's stand weaves a legacy. Will her truth unravel the powerful? Stick with us to find out. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button for our latest stories and share in the comments. Where are you listening from? Your support fuels this journey, so join us to discover how Celeste's spark lights a fire no one can extinguish. The November dusk draped Charleston in a veil of amber and salt, its cobblestone streets glistening under the faint glow of gas lamps. In a narrow alley off King Street, where the scent of magnolia clung to the air like a whispered secret, Celeste Warren moved with the quiet grace of a woman who'd learned to tread lightly in a world that watched her too closely. At 34, her beauty was a quiet storm, ebony skin that caught the light like polished obsidian, eyes deep as the marshes beyond the city, and a stillness that masked a fire no hardship could douse. To the unseeing, she was just a seamstress, a shadow stitching dreams for Charleston's elite. But beneath her calloused hands and simple blouse lay a story that could unravel the city's polished facade. Celeste's attic studio, perched above a sagging bookstore, was a sanctuary of thread and memory. The room hummed with the soft whir of her sewing machine, its rhythm a counterpoint to the distant laughter of tourists below. Bolts of silk and muslin leaned against walls papered in faded rose, while a single window framed the skyline of steeples and oaks. Her hands, nimble despite years of labor, danced over a swatch of ivory lace, each stitch a testament to a craft she'd once wielded like a scepter. 10 years ago, she'd been Celeste Warren, the prodigy whose hand-embroidered gowns had dazzled Paris, Milan, and Madrid. At 24, she'd clutched the Grand Prix de Mode in Paris, her name whispered in the same breath as Dior and Chanel. They'd called her the youngest queen of embroidery, her needle threading stories of her low-country roots into fabrics that made the world weep. But glory is a fickle lover. Celeste's world had shattered when her mother, the woman who taught her to sew under the glow of a kerosene lamp, succumbed to a sudden illness. Grief was only the first blow. A predatory contract signed in a haze of mourning had stripped her of her brand, her designs, name, and legacy, handed over to a corporation that erased her from its story. Betrayed and broken, Celeste fled the catwalks of Europe, returning to Charleston not as a star, but as a ghost. She chose the shadows, taking up mending and alterations for families who never asked who she was. Her needle was her refuge, her silence her armor. Tonight, as the city buzzed with anticipation for the Charleston Winter Gala, Celeste worked alone, the only light a bare bulb swaying above her. A half-finished gown hung on a mannequin, its satin folds catching the flicker of the bulb like moonlight on water. She paused, her fingers brushing the fabric, and closed her eyes. She saw her mother's hands, rough from years of laundry work, guiding her own over a scrap of cotton. "Your stitches hold your soul, baby," her mother had said, her voice a gospel hum. "Don't let nobody unravel you." The memory was a balm, steadying the ache in Celeste's chest. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening like the steel of her scissors. The phone on her work table buzzed, its screen cutting through the dim. Celeste glanced at it, her brow furrowing. The name Vanderbilt glowed, a summons from one of Charleston's most untouchable families. She answered, her voice low and measured. "Celeste Warren speaking." "Miss Warren, this is Margaret from the Vanderbilt estate," came a clipped voice, all business. "Miss Gabrielle needs an urgent alteration on her gala gown. It's haute couture, and we expect perfection. Can you be here by morning?" Celeste's jaw tightened. The Vanderbilts were Charleston royalty, their wealth built on real estate and old money, their name a currency that opened every door. Gabrielle Vanderbilt, the 26-year-old heiress, was notorious for her beauty and her cruelty, her tongue as sharp as the diamonds she wore. Celeste had mended for them before, always through intermediaries, her work praised but her presence ignored. "I'll be there," she said, her tone betraying nothing. Call ended and she set the phone down, her fingers lingering on its edge. She turned back to her work, but the air felt heavier now, charged with a premonition she couldn't shake. The Vanderbilts' world was one of opulence and exclusion, where people like her, black, unassuming, a servant in their eyes, were expected to bow. Celeste had learned to navigate their disdain, to let their slights slide like rain off a window. But tonight, as she threaded her needle, a gospel hymn her mother loved rose unbidden in her mind. Oh freedom over me. The words were a pulse, a reminder of the fire she'd buried but never lost. She stood crossing to the window. Charleston sprawled before her, its charm a mask for its scars. The city was a paradox, its pastel mansions and blooming gardens built on the backs of those it had enslaved. Its presence still shadowed by prejudice. Celeste knew its rules. Stay small, stay quiet, stay useful. She'd followed them for a decade, sending every dollar she earned to her younger sister in Atlanta, who was studying to be a doctor. But the cost of survival was steep. Each job for the elite, each silent nod to their arrogance, chipped away at the woman she'd been. Her gaze fell to a faded photograph tacked to the wall, its edges curling like a memory trying to escape. It showed her in Paris, radiant in a gown of her design, standing beside Marco Devereux, the creative director of Maison Vérité. Her smile was wide, her future boundless. She touched the photo, her fingertip tracing the curve of her younger self's cheek. "What would you do now?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air. The answer came not in words, but in the steady rhythm of her breath, the weight of her needle in her hand. She returned to the gown, her stitches precise, each one a small rebellion against the world that sought to diminish her. The Vanderbilt job would test her, she knew. Gabrielle's reputation preceded her, and the Gala was a stage where Charleston's elite displayed the air in Celeste Warren's attic studio was thick with the scent of starch and anticipation. The faint creak of her sewing machine a heartbeat in the pre-dawn stillness. She bent over a cascade of ivory silk, the haute couture gown for Gabrielle Vanderbilt, shimmering like a captured star. Her needle moved with surgical precision, threading delicate swirls of lace into the bodice. A flourish not requested but instinctive, a whisper of the artistry she'd once poured into Paris runways. Each stitch was a defiance, a claim to the talent she'd buried but never lost. The gown, a masterpiece of diaphanous folds and crystalline embellishments, demanded perfection, and Celeste, though unseen by those who'd wear it, would give nothing less. She worked through the night, her hands steady despite the ache in her shoulders. The Vanderbilt summons had been clear. The gown must be flawless by morning. Celeste knew the stakes. A single loose thread could invite scorn, not just on her work, but on her very existence in their world. She paused only once, her fingers brushing the lace she'd added, its pattern inspired by the gospel hymns her mother used to sing, swirls of hope woven into fabric. The memory steadied her, a quiet anchor against the storm she sensed brewing. At dawn, she arrived at the Vanderbilt estate, the gown cradled in a muslin cover. The mansion's oak doors loomed like sentinels, their polish reflecting her silhouette. Simple blouse, worn shoes, a woman made small by necessity. A butler ushered her to a parlor where Gabrielle waited, perched on a velvet chaise like a queen receiving tribute. Her auburn hair was pinned high, her emerald eyes scanning Celeste with the indifference of someone appraising a tool. She rose, her silk robe trailing, and gestured for the gown without a word. Celeste unzipped the cover, revealing the dress. The silk caught the morning light, its lace bodice a marvel of intricate blooms. Gabrielle circled it, her lips pursed, her gaze flicking over the fabric as if hunting for flaws. "It's adequate," she said finally, her voice a blade sheathed in honey. "Though I don't recall asking for extra embroidery." Her tone held a challenge, daring Celeste to justify her audacity. "It enhances the silhouette, Miss Vanderbilt," Celeste replied, her voice soft but unyielding. "The lace balances the neckline, makes it sing." She met Gabrielle's eyes, a fleeting act of courage, knowing the heiress saw her as less than the dust on her chandelier. Gabrielle's smile was thin, devoid of warmth. "It'll do," she said, waving a hand as if dismissing a servant. "Be at the gala tonight to deliver it backstage. I won't have my entrance marred by your tardiness." She turned away, her robe swishing, leaving Celeste with the butler and the weight of her unspoken disdain. Celeste nodded, her face a mask of calm, though her pulse thrummed with the insult. She'd expected no thanks. Gratitude was a currency the elite rarely spent on her. As she left the parlor, the gown now in the butler's care, she felt the familiar sting of being invisible, her artistry claimed without acknowledgement. But beneath that sting, a spark flickered, fed by the hymns in her soul, urging her to hold fast. That evening, Celeste approached the gala venue, the gown once more in her arms. The building's facade glittered with torchlight, its marble steps thronged with Charleston's elite in furs and tuxedos. She slipped through a side entrance, her plain attire a stark contrast to the opulence within. The backstage ballroom pulsed with chaos, maids arranging flowers, caterers balancing trays, a string quartet tuning in a corner. The air was electric, heavy with perfume and ambition, a world where power was worn as boldly as diamonds. Celeste navigated the crowd, her eyes scanning for the Vanderbilt entourage. She spotted two women lingering near a velvet curtain, their laughter sharp as glass. One, with a hawkish face and a stolen design pinned to her clutch, was Evelyn Pierce, a designer whose career thrived on pilfered ideas. The other, her blonde hair coiled tight, was Bianca Harrington, a former classmate whose envy of Celeste had festered into malice. Their presence was a warning, a reminder of the vipers who thrived in this gilded cage. She clutched the gown tighter, its silk a shield against the hostility she sensed. The gala was more than a party. It was a battlefield, where status was wielded like a blade, and someone like her was expected to bleed quietly. Yet Celeste stood straighter, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. "Your worth ain't in their eyes, baby." She was here to deliver a masterpiece, not to bow. As she moved toward the dressing area, the hum of the crowd grew louder, a prelude to the storm she couldn't yet see but felt in her bones. The backstage ballroom thrummed with a feverish pulse, a cacophony of clinking crystal and whispered vanities. Celeste Warren stood at its edge, the haute couture gown for Gabrielle Vanderbilt cradled in her arms like a fragile dream. The silk shimmered under the chandelier's glow, its embroidered bodice a testament to her unyielding craft. Her heart beat steadily, though the air felt charged, as if the room itself held its breath for a reckoning. She scanned the crowd, searching for the heiress, her simple blouse and skirt marking her as an outsider in this sea of sequins and self-importance. Gabrielle emerged from a cluster of admirers, the gown Celeste had perfected now clinging to her like a second skin. The ivory silk cascaded in waves, the lace blooms on the bodice catching the light like stars. Yet her face was a mask of disdain, her emerald eyes locking onto Celeste with predatory glee. She sauntered forward, a champagne flute dangling from her manicured fingers, her lips curling into a smile that promised cruelty. "You're late," she said, her voice slicing through the din, though Celeste had arrived precisely as instructed. "I'm here with the gown, Miss Vanderbilt," Celeste replied, her tone calm, a shield forged from years of swallowed slights. She extended the muslin cover, a final check for the dress, but Gabrielle waved it away, her laughter sharp as a whip crack. "Keep it," she sneered. "You look like you need something to hide that drab little outfit." The words drew titters from the crowd, heads turning to witness the sport. Then with a deliberate flick of her wrist, Gabrielle tilted her flute, sending a cascade of champagne splashing across Celeste's chest. The cold liquid soaked her blouse, clinging to her skin like a public branding. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, followed by stifled laughter, the sound of venom spreading. Celeste froze, her breath catching, but her spine remained iron. The gown in her arms stayed pristine, untouched by the assault. Gabrielle stepped closer, her voice rising for the audience. "Oops," she mocked, her eyes gleaming. "You're a mess now, aren't you? Clean it up, maid." She poured the remaining champagne onto the marble floor, the golden pool spreading like a challenge. "Wipe it, girl. That's what you're here for." The crowd parted, their silence a coward's agreement. A security guard, his jaw tight with unease, approached, pressing a coarse rag into Celeste's hand. She took it, her fingers steady, but she didn't bend. The rag hung limp, a symbol of the submission they demanded, yet her eyes burned with a fire that refused to dim. She thought of her mother, her gospel hymns a lifeline. "Oh, freedom over me." The words anchored her, a vow to stand tall against the storm. From the sidelines, Evelyn Pierce slithered forward, her hawkish face alight with malice. "Coco Chanel of the flea market," she taunted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Look at her, playing dress-up in our world." Bianca Harrington joined the fray, her blonde coils glinting as she leaned in. "You're nothing but a seamstress," she spat, her envy a blade honed by years of rivalry. "Crawl back to your little sewing machine. This stage isn't for you." Each word was a lash, meant to strip Celeste bare. The crowd's laughter swelled, a chorus of complicity, their eyes feasting on her humiliation. Yet Celeste stood unmoved, the soaked fabric of her blouse a badge of endurance. Her grip on the rag tightened, but she didn't lower her gaze. She saw her mother's hands guiding her needle through cotton, heard her voice. "Your soul's in your stitches, baby. Don't let them unravel you." The memory was a fortress, shielding her from their venom. Gabrielle crossed her arms, her gown shimmering like a cruel mirage. "What are you waiting for?" she snapped, her voice a whip. "Kneel and clean, or do you think you're above us?" The question hung heavy, a dare to break her. The guard shifted, his discomfort palpable, but he said nothing. The onlookers leaned closer, their anticipation a tangible weight. Celeste's lips parted, her voice low but resolute. "I'm here to deliver your gown, Miss Vanderbilt. That's my work." She held the heiress's gaze, her eyes a quiet rebellion, refusing the role of victim. The rag remained at her side, untouched, her dignity a flame no champagne could quench. The crowd's laughter faltered, a few faces turning away, unsettled by her defiance. Gabrielle's smirk twitched, a crack in her armor, but she doubled down, stepping into the spilled champagne, her heels clicking. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice a promise of retribution. Celeste didn't flinch. Her silence was louder than the jeers, her presence a challenge to their power. The moment stretched, taut as a thread on the verge of snapping, and Celeste braced for what might come, her mother's hymn a pulse in her veins, urging her to stand. The air in the backstage ballroom crackled with malice, the spilled champagne at Celeste Warren's feet a glittering accusation. Her blouse clung wet to her skin, the coarse rag in her hand a weight she refused to wield. Gabrielle Vanderbilt loomed before her ivory gown a cruel mockery of Celeste's artistry, her sneer daring her to kneel. Evelyn Pierce and Bianca Harrington flanked the heiress, their taunts, "flea market Chanel," "seamstress nobody," still ringing in the ears of the onlookers, whose laughter had curdled into a hungry silence. Celeste stood unwavering, her eyes a quiet inferno, her mother's gospel hymn pulsing in her veins. "Oh, freedom over me." She would not bend, not for their venom, not for their power. Then like a thunderclap, a voice shattered the tension. "Wait, is that Celeste Warren?" The words rang from the balcony above, clear and resonant, slicing through the crowd's murmur. Every head turned, eyes climbing to the source. Marco Devereaux, his silver hair aglow under the chandelier's light, leaned over the railing, his face alight with disbelief and reverence. His tailored suit gleamed, but it was his voice, rich with authority, that held the room captive. "The Celeste Warren," he repeated, descending the marble stairs with a grace that commanded attention. "The queen of hand embroidery?" Celeste's breath caught, her grip on the rag tightening. She knew that voice, that cadence from a decade ago, when Paris had crowned her. The crowd parted as Marco approached, his phone in hand, its screen displaying a photograph that stopped hearts. Celeste, radiant in a self-designed gown, standing beside him in a fashion icon, her Grand Prix de Mode trophy gleaming under Parisian lights. A young woman nearby, her press badge glinting, fumbled for her phone and began live streaming, her camera capturing the shift in the room's gravity. Gabrielle's smirk faltered, her champagne flute trembling in her hand. Evelyn's hawkish face paled, her bravado evaporating. Bianca's coiled blonde hair seemed to wilt as her eyes darted between Marco and Celeste, her malice replaced by panic. The onlookers, once eager for Celeste's humiliation, now shifted uneasily, their silence a confession of complicity. Marco stopped before Celeste, his gaze warm, almost reverent. "I'd know your work anywhere," he said, gesturing to Gabrielle's gown. "That embroidery, those lace blooms. No one else could craft that. It's yours, isn't it?" Celeste met his eyes, her voice soft but steady, a thread of steel beneath her calm. "I did what was needed, Mr. Devereux. Just my job." Her words were simple, devoid of boast, yet they carried a weight that silenced the room. She stood there, soaked and scorned, yet her dignity was a beacon, untouched by the champagne or the jeers. The rag remained at her side, a symbol she'd refused to let define her. Marco's smile widened, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "Your job?" he said, his voice rising for all to hear. "You reshaped fashion at 24. You made runways weep with your needle. This," he pointed to the gown, its lace shimmering like a hymn made visible. "This is no mere job. This is art." He turned to the crowd, his phone still aloft. The photograph of verdict. "This woman is a legend, and you dared to treat her like this?" The live stream's red light blinked, broadcasting the moment to the world. Whispers erupted, a tide of shock and shame. A woman in pearls clutched her clutch, her laughter now a memory. A man in a tuxedo looked away, his face flushed. Gabrielle stepped back, her gown rustling, her authority crumbling under Marco's truth. I I didn't know," she stammered, her voice a weak defense. But the crowd's eyes were on Celeste, seeing her anew. Evelyn muttered something inaudible, retreating into the shadows. Bianca's lips parted, but no words came. Her envy was exposed as petty cruelty. Celeste remained still, her wet blouse a badge of endurance, her gaze fixed on Marco, then Gabrielle. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence was her rebuttal, her silence louder than their earlier taunts. The gospel in her soul sang on, a promise of freedom she'd claimed by standing tall. Marco lowered his phone, his eyes returning to Celeste. "You never stopped creating, did you?" he asked, softer now, a question meant only for her. She nodded, a faint smile curving her lips, a glimpse of the woman who'd once lit up Paris. The crowd held its breath, the moment fragile, electric. Celeste let the rag slip to the floor, its fall a quiet rebellion, her hands empty but her spirit full. She had weathered their storm, and now with Marco's echo ringing, the world was listening. The ballroom's chandelier light faded behind Celeste Warren as she slipped into the night, her soaked blouse a cold weight against her skin. The rag she dropped lay forgotten, a symbol of her refusal to bow. Marco Devereux's words still echoed in her ears, his revelation of her past a spark that had silenced her tormentors. Yet as she walked, her steps deliberate, the weight of the moment pressed against her chest. She felt the eyes of the crowd, no longer mocking but searching, as if seeing her for the first time. Her mother's gospel hymn pulsed within her. "O freedom over me," a quiet fire fueling her resolve. By midnight, the spark Marco ignited had become a blaze. The journalist's live stream, capturing Gabrielle Vanderbilt's cruelty and Celeste's unyielding dignity, exploded across X. The hashtag #WashCelesteWarren trended, a digital rallying cry that lit up screens from coast to coast. Clips of Gabrielle splashing champagne, her sneer twisting as she demanded Celeste kneel, looped endlessly, each view stoking public outrage. "Disgraceful," one user posted, their words echoed by thousands. "Celeste Warren is a queen, and they tried to break her." Others shared the photograph Marco displayed, Celeste radiant in Paris, her trophy gleaming, proof of a legacy the heiress had dared to scorn. Comments poured in, a chorus of strangers calling Celeste a hero, their words a balm to wounds she'd carried in silence. "She stood tall," a fashion student wrote. "That's power." Another post from a designer exposed Evelyn Pierce's history of stealing Black artists' work, her name now a stain. Bianca Harrington's venomous taunts were dissected, her envy laid bare as petty cruelty. The internet, fickle but fierce, turned its gaze on the trio, their privilege no shield against the tide. Gabrielle's attempt at a social media apology, a tepid, "I regret any misunderstanding," was drowned in scorn, her followers hemorrhaging by the hour. Celeste, unaware of the digital storm, returned to her attic studio, quiet, a stark contrast to the Gala's chaos. She peeled off her wet blouse, replacing it with a worn cotton shirt, her hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what had transpired. She sat at her sewing machine, its familiar hum a grounding rhythm. Her fingers traced a scrap of lace, the same pattern she'd woven into Gabrielle's gown, a piece of her soul she'd given freely. The memory of the heiress's contempt stung, but Marco's recognition, his voice naming her a legend, stirred something deeper. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Her phone buzzed, its screen alight with notifications. She hesitated, then opened X, her breath catching at the flood of support. A video of her standing firm, champagne dripping, played on repeat, captioned, "This is what strength looks like." Messages from strangers offered admiration, some pleading for her return to fashion spotlight. Offers from brands, runway shows, collaborations, piled up, their promises glittering but hollow. Celeste scrolled, her eyes lingering on a post from a young black seamstress. "You gave me hope tonight. Thank you." The words pierced her, a call to something greater than fame. She set the phone down, her gaze drifting to a photograph of her mother, its edges curled from time. "What now, Mama?" she whispered, the gospel hymn rising in her chest. The answer came not in words but in a vision, a place where women like her, pushed to the margins, could create without fear. She thought of the young seamstress, of countless others whose dreams were stifled by doors slammed shut. Her hands, still steady, itched to build something new. By dawn, Celeste had made her choice. She declined the brand offers, her polite refusals a quiet rebellion against a world that had once betrayed her. Instead, she envisioned a workshop, a sanctuary of thread and dignity. She would call it Thread of Dignity, a space to train young black women, to teach them to stitch their futures with pride. The idea took root, fierce and unyielding, a purpose born from the night's pain and triumph. She sketched a logo on a scrap of paper, a needle threading a blooming vine, her heart alight with possibility. As the morning unfolded, the online whispers grew louder, a reckoning for those who'd sought to break her. Gabrielle's social circle shrank, her family's influence fraying under public scrutiny. Evelyn's latest collection was boycotted, her plagiarism exposed. Bianca vanished from online platforms, her silence a confession. Celeste, though, looked forward, not back. She stood, her mother's hymn a steady pulse, ready to weave a new legacy, not for the elite, but for those who, like her, refused to kneel. The morning after the gala, Celeste Warren stood in a narrow storefront, its dusty windows filtering sunlight onto bare floorboards. In her hands was a lease agreement, freshly signed, the ink a promise of something new. Thread of Dignity, she'd named her vision, a workshop to cradle the dreams of young black women pushed aside by an industry that prized privilege over talent. Her heart thrummed with purpose, the echo of her mother's gospel hymn, "Oh, freedom over me," a steady pulse urging her forward. The champagne stains of the previous night, the jeers of Gabrielle Vanderbilt, Evelyn Pierce, and Bianca Harrington had faded, replaced by a fire that no cruelty could extinguish. She moved with quiet determination, arranging second-hand sewing machines along a wall, their metal frames gleaming with possibility. Bolts of muslin and cotton, donated by a local fabric shop stirred by her story, leaned in a corner like soldiers awaiting orders. The air hummed with the scent of thread and wax, a sanctuary taking shape. Celeste's fingers, calloused from years of stitching, traced the edge of a wooden table, her mind alive with images of women gathered here, their needles dancing, their laughter a defiance of the world's disdain. She saw her mother's hands in her own, guiding her to weave not just fabric but futures. Her first students arrived at noon, their faces a mosaic of hope and hesitation. There was Amara, barely 20, whose sketches had been mocked by a design school. Lena, whose single mother's wages couldn't afford her dreams, and Jade, whose bold patterns had never left her notebook. Celeste greeted them with a nod, her calm a beacon. "This is your space," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Here you create, here you stand tall." The women exchanged glances, their shoulders easing, as if her words had unlocked a door long shut. She began with the basics, threading a needle, balancing tension. But her lessons were more than technical. She taught them to see their work as art, their hands as instruments of power. "Every stitch is a story," she told Amara, adjusting her grip. "Tell yours." To Lena, struggling with a seam, she offered, "Patience is your strength. Let it show." Jade's vibrant fabric caught her eye, and she smiled. "That's your voice. Let it sing." The room filled with the whir of machines and the murmur of discovery, a symphony of women reclaiming their worth. Word of threat of dignity spread like wildfire, fueled by the viral storm of Celeste's stand. A church group, moved by her courage, arrived with a donation of scissors and thread, their pastor clasping her hand. "You're building a legacy," he said, his eyes warm. Neighbors dropped by with homemade cornbread, their smiles a silent vow of support. A teenage girl clutching a sketchbook lingered at the door, whispering, "I saw you on X. You didn't break." Celeste invited her in, her heart swelling. This was her mother's hymn made flesh, a community rising to lift its own. The workshop buzzed with life, its energy a stark contrast to the gala's venom. Amara's first dress, a bold silhouette with hand-stitched vines, hung on a rack, drawing gas from the others. Lena mastered a tricky hem, her grin fierce. Jade's fabric became a scarf, its colors a rebellion against the grayness of doubt. Celeste watched, her chest tight with pride, her mother's voice echoing, "Your soul's in your stitches, baby." She saw it now in every thread, every laugh, every dream taking shape. Yet the weight of her journey lingered. The memory of Gabrielle's champagne, Evelyn's scorn, and Bianca's malice was a shadow she carried. But here, surrounded by her students' courage, it felt lighter. She didn't need the elite's applause. She needed this, the clatter of needles, the spark in Amara's eyes, the community that had rallied when she stood. A flyer from the church announcing a fundraiser for her workshop sat on the table, its bold letters a testament to their faith in her. As evening fell, Celeste paused, her hands resting on a swatch of silk. She thought of the photograph from Paris, the girl she'd been, and realized she hadn't lost her. That girl lived in this room, in the women she taught, in the legacy she was weaving. She stepped to a chalkboard, sketching the workshop's logo, a needle threading a blooming vine. "Thread of dignity," she murmured, the name a vow. She wasn't just teaching sewing, she was teaching freedom, the kind her mother had sung of, the kind no one could unravel. The students gathered around, their faces alight, their voices a chorus of plans and dreams. Celeste stood among them, her blouse dry now, her spirit soaring. The world outside might still judge, but here she was building something unbreakable. The gospel hymn sang on, a promise fulfilled, and Celeste knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hum of sewing machines in Celeste Warren's workshop had become a heartbeat, a rhythm of creation that drowned out the echoes of her public humiliation. Days had passed since the gala, since the champagne-soaked blouse and the jeers of Gabrielle Vanderbilt, Evelyn Pierce, and Bianca Harrington. Yet the fire of that night, fanned by Marco Devereaux's revelation and the internet's roar, had not faded. It burned in Celeste's chest as she guided her students' hands, their needles stitching dreams into reality. Her mother's gospel hymn, "Oh, Freedom Over Me," was a quiet anthem, grounding her as she built Thread of Dignity into a sanctuary for those the world overlooked. But across the city, the empire of Gabrielle Vanderbilt was fracturing. The heiress, once untouchable in her silken scorn, now paced a marble-floored parlor, her emerald eyes dulled by the weight of disgrace. The viral clips of her cruelty, splashing champagne, demanding Celeste kneel, had stripped her of her gilded armor. Invitations to elite gatherings dried up, replaced by whispers of her family's arrogance. Business partners, sensing the taint, distanced themselves, their contracts dissolving like mist. Gabrielle's social media, once a shrine to her privilege, was a graveyard of deleted comments and blocked accounts. Her apology, a hollow string of words, had only deepened the public's contempt. She sat at a mahogany desk, her fingers trembling as she typed a message to Celeste. "I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't mean it." The words felt foreign, inadequate, but the silence that followed her sending them was worse. She stared at her phone, willing a reply, but none came. Doubt gnawed at her, a new sensation for someone raised to believe her name was a shield. For the first time, she saw her actions through others' eyes. The cruelty, the entitlement, and the reflection was a wound she couldn't close. Evelyn Pierce fared no better. The designer whose career thrived on stolen ideas found her latest collection shunned, her plagiarism laid bare by online sleuths. Galleries that once fawned over her now turned away, their doors locked to her name. She retreated to her studio, her hawkish face gaunt, her sketches untouched. Bianca Harrington, meanwhile, had vanished from public view, her venomous taunts at the gala now a noose around her reputation. Her social media accounts went dark, her silence a surrender to the judgment she'd once wielded so freely. The trio, bound by their malice, were now ghosts in a world that had moved on. Celeste, in her workshop, felt the ripples of their downfall through whispers from her students. Amara, threading a needle, mentioned a boycott of Evelyn's work. Lena, cutting fabric, spoke of Bianca's absence from a fashion panel. Jade, her scarf vibrant on a mannequin, scoffed at Gabrielle's failed apology. Yet Celeste remained focused, her hands steady as she adjusted a student's seam. The world's justice was not her concern. Her mission was here, in the clatter of machines and the spark of creation. Her phone buzzed, Gabrielle's message glowing on the screen. Celeste read it, her expression unreadable. The words were a plea, but they lacked the weight of true remorse. She thought of the champagne, the rag, the laughter, and her mother's voice rose within her. Your worth ain't in their apologies, baby. Forgiveness might come, but not yet. Not until Gabrielle proved her regret was more than a shield against shame. Celeste set the phone aside, her heart heavy but resolute. She had no time for the remnants of that night. Her future was in the women around her, their dreams a tapestry she was weaving. A knock at the workshop door broke her thoughts. A church volunteer, her arms full of donated thread, handed Celeste a flyer for a fundraiser to support Thread of Dignity. The whole community's behind you, the woman said, her smile fierce. Celeste nodded, her throat tight. The flyer's bold letters were a vow, a reminder of the hands lifting her, hands like her mother's, calloused but kind. She pinned it to a board next to a sketch of her logo, a needle threading a blooming vine. As she returned to her students, a fashion magazine's email arrived, requesting an interview. Celeste ignored it, her focus on Amara's latest design, a dress that sang of courage. The world could wait. Her work was here, in the laughter of her students, the hum of their machines. The gospel hymn swelled in her soul, a promise of freedom she was making real. Gabrielle's message, Evelyn's ruin, Bianca's silence, they were shadows fading against the light of what she built. Celeste stood among her students, her hands guiding theirs, her legacy no longer a memory but a living, breathing truth. The workshop hummed with the clatter of sewing machines, a symphony of creation that filled Celeste Warren's heart with a quiet fire. Thread of Dignity had become more than a refuge. It was a beacon, its tables crowded with young Black women whose needles wove dreams into reality. Months had passed since the gala, since Gabrielle Vanderbilt's champagne and the jeers of Evelyn Pierce and Bianca Harrington had sought to break her. Yet Celeste stood unbroken, her mother's gospel hymn, "Oh, freedom over me," a pulse that guided her hands and her purpose. Today, a new challenge awaited, a Vogue reporter, pen poised, ready to capture her story. Celeste sat across from the journalist, her cotton blouse crisp, her eyes steady. The workshop buzzed around them, Amara adjusting a dress's hem, Lena threading a vibrant scarf, Jade sketching a bold new pattern. The reporter, her notebook bristling with questions, leaned forward. "Do you ever regret stepping away from the spotlight?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. "You could have reclaimed Paris, the runways, everything." Celeste paused, her fingers brushing a swatch of silk on the table. The question stirred memories of a younger self, radiant under Parisian lights, but they no longer stung. She glanced at her students, their laughter a melody of resilience, and a smile curved her lips, serene and certain. "No," she said, her voice clear, a thread of steel beneath its calm. I didn't come here to be seen. I came so no one else would be forgotten. The words hung in the air, a manifesto born from the pain of that champagne-soaked night and the triumph that followed. The reporter scribbled furiously, but Celeste's focus drifted to the workshop's heart. Amara's dress, a silhouette of vines and blooms, hung on a rack, its stitches a testament to her growth. Lena's scarf, bold with crimson and gold, drew gasps from a visiting seamstress. Jade's sketch, a gown that defied convention, lay on a table, its lines fierce. These were her legacy, not trophies or headlines, but lives transformed, voices amplified. The gospel hymn swelled in her soul, her mother's hands guiding her own, whispering, "Your stitches hold your soul, baby." The workshop's growth was a quiet revolution. The church fundraiser had brought bolts of fabric and new machines, its congregation calling Celeste a blessing. Neighbors inspired by her stand dropped by with thread and encouragement, their smiles a shield against the world's lingering prejudice. A local boutique had commissioned Amara's dress for display, its debut earning praise online. Lena's scarves sold out at a community market, her grin fierce. Jade's sketches caught a designer's eye, her talent no longer confined to paper. Celeste watched, her chest tight with pride, knowing each success was a stitch in a tapestry larger than herself. Yet the shadow of the gala lingered. Gabrielle's unanswered apology sat in Celeste's phone, a weight she wasn't ready to lift. Forgiveness required more than words. It demanded change, and the heiress's silence, since her message spoke louder than her regret. Evelyn's and Bianca's downfall, careers ruined, names tarnished, offered no satisfaction. Celeste's victory was here, in the clatter of needles, the spark in her students' eyes. She thought of her mother whose hymns had taught her to stand, and felt her presence in every thread, every laugh. The reporter closed her notebook, her eyes warm. "You're building something extraordinary," she said, gesturing to the workshop. "The world needs to know." Celeste nodded, but her heart was with her students, their work a rebuttal to the gala's venom. She walked the reporter out, pausing at the door where a chalkboard bore the workshop's logo, a needle threading a blooming vine. It was her mother's hymn made visible, a promise of freedom she'd kept. As evening fell, the students gathered to unveil their first collection, a dozen pieces, each a story of courage. Amara presented her dress, Lena her scarf, Jade her sketch gown, their voices bold. Celeste stood among them, her blouse a contrast to the gala's wet ruin, her spirit soaring. The collection drew gas, its beauty raw and unapologetic, a challenge to an industry that had overlooked them. Online buzz grew, the hashtag thread of dignity trending, but Celeste's focus remained on her students, their futures, her true crown. She stepped to the workshop center, her hands empty but her heart full. The gospel hymn sang on, a vow fulfilled. The world might write her story, but she was writing theirs. Amara's, Lena's, Jade's, and countless others. She had stood against cruelty, and now she stood for them, ensuring no one would be forgotten. Celeste looked at her students, their eyes alight, and knew this was her calling, her freedom, her song. Thank you, dear listeners, for walking with Celeste Warren through her journey of courage and creation. Her story, from a champagne-soaked night to the vibrant threads of thread of dignity, is a testament to the power of standing tall. What moved you most? Was it Celeste's quiet defiance, her students' blooming dreams, or the community that rose to lift her? Share your thoughts in the comments, on X, or wherever you connect. We'd love to hear your voice. Your support keeps these stories alive, so hit that like, share, and subscribe to join us again. Until next time, stay bold, stay true, and let your threads of dignity shine.